Welcome to the CEO Launch Podcast.
We are a dynamic mother-daughter duo bringing you personality, insights, and practical advice from two different generations of entrepreneurship.
We aren't just mother and daughter. We are also best friends and business partners.
I've watched my mom help thousands of entrepreneurs start the businesses of their dreams, including me. And now it's your turn. Hello, CEO Launch family. Welcome back to episode 37. Last week, we talked about how to make sure that your services are the solution to someone's problem. This week, we're going to be talking about how some things aren't personal, they're just business. So to kick us off with the story, go ahead, Mom.
All right, so welcome CEO Launch family. So I have another story today to share. And I honestly have, I've been in my accounting firm for 20 years, so I have a lot of stories, but we picked one of the stories to share today. In my accounting practice, one of the services that we provide is tax preparation for business owners. And so our rule is that before we can electronically file a tax return, we have to have one, their signature authorization to file the return, and two, we have to have their invoice payment. And when we have those two things, then we file a return. So if we have a payment and no pages, no file. If we have pages and no payment, no file. And that's just been our rule for 15, almost the whole 20 years that we've been in business. I think I learned that pretty quickly out the gate. So a couple of years ago, I had a client that they were having some cash flow issues this particular year. In the previous years, they were pretty good, no major issues. And so the client said that they weren't going to be able to pay on the due date of the invoice, but they would pay on X date, which was maybe a week or two after the due date. So I said, okay. And that was the end of that. So the due date of the invoice came and passed, no payment, but they said they wouldn't. The date that they said they were going to pay came and passed, no payment, and they didn't say anything. And so then the deadline date came and they still hadn't paid. And I think they ended up paying their invoice about a week or two after the deadline. So based on the rules, when we receive both pages and payments, then we electronically file a return. And so because we received the payment after the due date, the return was filed after the due date. So a couple of months later, they got a letter from the IRS saying, hey, we got your return, but it was late. These are your late fees. And the client came back to me and said, hey, did you file my return late? And I said, hey, yes, because you paid late. And the client got personal. They said, well, after all these years that I've been doing business with you, how could you do this to me? And I said, well, my business rules are XYZ. Is not personal, it's business. If it was personal, then I could in turn say to you, after all these years that I've been filing your taxes for you, how could you pay me late? And the client said, you know what? You're absolutely right. And they apologized. And we've since moved on. We have no issues with late payments. But I shared their story just to say that sometimes in your business, you're going to be forced to make some hard decisions. And it might look like it's personal, but it's not. It's business.
Yeah. I think drawing those hard lines is really important because we say this all the time that boundaries are important. Things being personal goes both ways because it's about having respect for each other's business and each other's processes and systems and establishments. And when you step outside of those lines, those hard lines that we draw, disrespectful to a certain extent because it's not being considerate of what other people have going on. And because you don't have that consideration, now it does feel personal. It does feel as though somebody is intentionally attacking you when in reality, it's just more so about establishing systems and processes and reinforcing the things that you establish.
Yeah. And like you said, with business boundaries, it's about respect. It's really about respect and knowing that who I am as a person, Bernadette, has nothing to do with who I am as a business owner in that regard, I should say. It's real important for us to make a distinction between who I am personally and then what my business is and what my business purpose is to you.
Yeah. And I think another thing that's important is this isn't just something that reflects between like you and your clients. This is something that you have to think about with you and your vendors. You may be doing business or in business with friends or family and things like that. That is a situation that still requires you to have expectations for what that business or professional relationship looks like. It's not an opportunity to bring in like, oh, well, you supposed to be my best friend and we supposed to do this, and now you critiquing me on X, Y, and Z, or, letting people have incredibly late deadlines while you're paying money. Reinforcing those boundaries can help you make cost-effective decisions. You don't have to waste money on things or people just because they're friends and family. You don't have to be bad at business just to maintain certain relationships. And you don't have to treat people badly just because you want to be good at business. That's something that's really important too, because a lot of times when people do say things like, oh, it's not personal, it's just business, it does come off a little malicious. It can be a little almost conniving in a sense, as if like, oh, you scheming on me or you plotting on me or whatever, when in reality, if it's done in a benevolent way and if it's done from a place of sincerity and almost self-preservation, then it's more so coming from a space of being able to protect and maintain the thing that I built.
Yeah.
That is what's important here.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes, like you said, sometimes having personal relationships with whether it's clients or vendors, having a personal relationships with that person might put you in a situation where you feel like you should give more than you are giving. And that's not always the case,
right.
And I always say this, like, I know this is a little off topic, but I want to just say this because a lot of people are falling out with their family and friends because they don't support their businesses or they don't do business with them. And I always say that just because they're your family and friend doesn't mean that they need to support your business or they should support your business. We had a whole episode about that, right? So you can go back and check out that episode. But just because you have those personal relationships, I mean, you still have to market. The same thing that you had to do to get a client, you still have to do those things. If you have relationships with vendors, they still need to perform the services that you paid them for. Just because that's your cousin or your BFF doesn't mean that they don't provide the service.
Yeah, I think that's super important because a lot of times when we say it's business, what we're trying to say is I'm a professional. I have standards. I have expectations. And because most people don't carry that on into their personal life or kind of have those same expectations and standards and things when we think about like being a personable person or things that we do in our personal life is usually a little more lighthearted. We revert to, well, it's just business. This is how I am as a professional. And it makes it easier for us to have those hard lines. But I think it's a good time for us to get into our takeaways. We touched on this a little bit, but I think saying it's business does not mean that you have to be mean. You do not have to treat people badly. It doesn't make you a villain.
Yeah, you don't have to be a jerk to be a CEO or business owner, right? So you can still treat your customers kindly. You can still be professional to even your cousin who's also a vendor. That's not an excuse to be a jerk.
Yeah, because nobody wants to do business with a jerk. And I think one of those kind of 80s themes that I recall is like the 80s businessman that's like cutthroat and will sacrifice every and anybody to get to where they need to go and things like that. I'm thinking about specific movies. Really, American Psycho kind of comes to mind. But just like this idea of like, But yeah, just not being like that, not thinking that you have to cut people down in order to build yourself up. That's not what we mean by it's business. No. And then the second part is, it's okay for you to be personable to your customers and your clients. And you vendors. Can do that. And your vendors and still have boundaries and expectations and standards, as we mentioned. Like those two things are not mutually exclusive. It is possible to be nice and kind and treat people well and still have expectations for how they should perform or what they should do or things of that nature.
And having those hard conversations, like I would say pulling somebody's coattail or snatching edges. What can you say that's old? We won't say that anymore, but
gathering them. That's what the children say now.
But whatever the case may be, just because you have a personal relationship, it doesn't keep you from being able to have those tough conversations. And this last takeaway is actually my absolute favorite. And it is, we have to create rules and be consistent in following those rules. And so as a parent, I know as with parenting you, Kenya, when I created rules, it made things easier for me if the rule was always the same. So if the rule changed every week, then you would test me on every chance, but the rule was always the same. And that's the way that it is in my business. Like the story that I told you, the rule is the same and it's the same for everybody. I need pages and payment. And once we get pages and payments, then we can e-file. And by creating a rule and being consistent with that rule, what it does is that's a way to scale your business, because now when you're bringing other people on, you have a process and a system for the way that you do this. And it's not subjective. It's not based on how you feel in that day. This is the rule and we consistently follow it.
Yeah, that is exactly it. And just adding on to that, that consistency makes all the difference, because when people see that you are continuously showing up a particular way, it makes it easier to have those differentiations that we mentioned before. Who you are as a person, who you are as a CEO, and what your business stands for. When you have that consistent messaging, those consistent systems, we know it's not a question.
Right.
We understand what that looks like.
Right.
So those are our takeaways for today. We hope that this episode was helpful. I kind of took over your part, so you can go ahead and say the rest.
You can say it. Go ahead and say it this time. I like for you to say it.
No, I don't know what you say. Follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. We're not on TikTok, though.
No. Instagram.
Where else are we? Instagram. Yes. At the CEO Launch. And join our Facebook group, The Efficient CEO. Yes. See, I got it, y'all. Consistency. See, this goes back to having rules. She does the end of it. And now because I'm doing it, it's not the way that it should be. So be consistent.
So we're going to take our own advice in the next episode. So join us next week when we're going to talk about prioritizing the things that's important in your business. See you next week.
And don't forget to take off.
This is a Clear Word production.